Hello, healers. My name is Ben, and this is the Moss Report. I'm here today with my father, founder of the Moss Report, Dr. Ralph W. Moss. Good morning, Dad.
Good morning, Ben.
So, I understand that you have some information for us as it relates to soy and breast cancer. So, what can you tell us on this subject?
Well, for a long time, patients were being told that they couldn't eat soy products, tofu, tempeh, and soy milk if they had a history of breast cancer or if they were undergoing treatment for breast cancer. And the thinking, the conventional orthodox thinking on that has changed over a period of years. But I still have spoken to many women in particular who, with a history of breast cancer, who are afraid to take soy because of this message that went out for decades. As soon as it was discovered, really, that there were so-called phytoestrogens in soy, phyto being the word for plant, estrogen being a class of female hormones. And so once people heard that there were phytoestrogens and that estrogen fuels the growth of about 80% of breast cancers, they became worried that the phytoestrogens in the plants were going to promote their breast cancer. And this was amplified by a lot of so-called experts in the field. And for many years, people were being warned away from taking soy products, from using soy products. So I want to very clearly state that that is not the case. That it is not the case that soy promotes breast cancer or prostate cancer. And the reason for that, well, there are theoretical reasons. The main one being that the phytoestrogens are much, much less powerful, much weaker than the human estrogens. So that's the first thing. I have seen in my research, I've seen numbers as high as 1,000-fold weaker, that the estrogen that promotes the growth of 80% of human breast cancers are 1,000 times stronger than the ones that you would get in the soy. So why then would they say that it was dangerous? Well, there had been a couple of animal experiments in which people were given huge amounts of the estrogen, and it behaved like an estrogen and made the cancer grow. But that had little or no relationship to the actual human situation. And yet, this myth that eating soy will promote breast cancer still persists. And as far as I know, it is still the official policy in the European Union that this is the case, and women are being told to limit their intake of soy, and men also with prostate cancer, another hormone-driven cancer. And papers have appeared trying to appeal to the authorities in Europe to change this policy, but to my knowledge, it still stands. And a lot of other articles were written that scared women. So it amazes me, since the knowledge that, in fact, it's exactly the opposite. That
Well, I was going to ask you that because then it's one thing to not be afraid of it, but it's another thing entirely
Yeah,
to be removing something that could be beneficial.
right,
I just want to also interject one other thought that came to me while you were talking, and that is that it reminds me a lot of what happened around that one paper or that one study that had to do with antioxidants,
right,
and that somehow that the topic of antioxidants being in conflict with chemotherapy got widespread attention, but that it actually doesn't, and that in fact antioxidants can help fight cancer. Somehow that got overlooked. So I
absolutely.
like I like that you're doing this kind of clarifying for me and for our audience, because there is a lot of information that's hard to sift through, and this is the type of challenge that people historically have trying to research best practices of their own healing methods. So thanks for that.
Yeah.
So soy, you're saying it has been studied.
Oh, absolutely. And I want to sort of walk you through a few of the papers. There's a lot of papers that I could reference, but I've looked for, the highest quality ones through PubMed and sifting through and looking at as I always do, what the origin of the paper is. Is this coming from the soy industry, Archer Daniels, Midlands, or something? No, it's not. These are independent scientists looking objectively, and they're not involved in these so-called wars between meat eaters and vegetarians. It's not, nothing like that. These are genuine science. So in 2011, a group of people at University of California, San Diego, analyzed the data from a very big study called the Women's Healthy Eating and Living study. It's 3,088 breast cancer survivors. They were followed for an average of 7.3 years. And here's their conclusion. I'll modify the wording a little bit. As soy intake increased, the risk of death decreased significantly. Women at the highest level of soy intake had a 54% reduction in the risk of death. They conclude our study is the third population-based study to report no adverse effects of soy foods on breast cancer progress. And their impact statement, clinicians no longer need to advise against soy consumption for women diagnosed with breast cancer. And this, as I say, came out of um, four top medical centers, including University of California at San Diego. Betty Kahn was the first author on that one. I'll send you the link and you can put that in the description, Ben, so people can look for themselves on this.
I
Uh,
will.
in Not long after that, in 2012, there was a study done on a, a, a large group of people, and this was mostly in China, but it was published in American Journal of Clinical Nutrition. And it says, after a follow-up of 7.4 years, we identified 1,171 deaths from breast cancer and 1,346 recurrences. The soy consumption was inversely associated with recurrence among both US and Chinese women, inversely meaning that the more soy they took in, isoflavones from soy, the less the risk of breast cancer and the less the risk of death and recurrences. The reduction in the reduced risk from any cause was 13%. Breast cancer specific reduced risk was 17%, and there was a statistically significant reduced risk of recurrence of 25%. So the conclusion of that paper the following year, in this large study of combined U.S. and Chinese women, the eating soy was associated with a reduced risk of recurrence, and that's the second study I wanted to say. And then that was Nechuta. People can look that up. Nechuta is the first author. In another paper that was called Positive Effects of Soy Isoflavone Food on Survival of Breast Cancer Patients in China. So this is where they were looking forward, not just looking at what had happened in the past, but following the patients as they went forward. Um, After a follow-up of almost 5 years, 4.5 years, there were 79 breast cancer related deaths recorded. The risk was, again, inversely associated with a high intake of soy, meaning the more they ate, the less there was a chance of the cancer recurring. With an average intake, the death from breast cancer could be reduced by about 38%. That's what they found in that study, reducing the risk of dying from breast cancer. There was a better prognosis in most of the studies, a better prognosis in the estrogen receptor positive breast cancer with a high intake of soy. You would expect that because if it's and I'll give you, I will say why that would be so, because the weak estrogen of the soy, the best theory, I think, of why soy is protective against breast cancer. The weak estrogen in the soy, it doesn't stimulate the growth of the breast cancer cells. It attaches itself to the receptor that the normal human estrogen would, the same receptor on the surface of the breast cancer cell that the human estrogen would use to stimulate the growth of the cell. So it's a kind of placebo or stand-in for the real strong human
Let
estrogen.
me see if I understand what you just said. So, in a way, it sounds like you're saying that because you're taking in these phytoestrogens,
Yeah.
it may also be reducing the amount of human estrogen that the body produces as well.
That can get to the cancer.
Okay.
It's not, to my knowledge, it's not affecting the amount. I don't know if that's the case,
Okay.
but what I'm saying is that it plugs up the hole
I see.
that the human estrogen would use to get in and agitate and promote the
Huh.
breast cancer.
Interesting theory. Was that proposed in that study as part of, or is this your
Oh,
own
no,
analysis?
it's neither. It's from other studies.
I see.
I'd have to find the reference for that, but this is how I've always, and most people have understood the
Okay.
activity of it. It's nothing original to me.
Well,
I'm not that, but it makes sense because yes, it is estrogen, but if it's estrogen 1,000 times weaker, it's like you're putting in. I don't know, can't think of a good analogy, but as
yeah,
I
no,
said,
I think I understand what you're saying, that
it's blocking
it's
the same
it's
pathway.
occupying the space where the human
Right.
estrogen might be
Correct.
interacting with the cancer.
Correct. Exactly right. I do think this is very, very important that you understand how strong this data is. I'll describe basically one more paper, and that was a paper from 2020 from China, a prospective study of 300,000 Chinese women, and they did an analysis, and it was each 10 milligrams per day increase in soy isoflavones was associated with a 3% reduced risk of breast cancer. There was moderate soy intake was not associated with breast cancer risk among Chinese women. Higher amounts um, of soy intake might provide reasonable benefits for the prevention of breast cancer, based on a study of 300,000 women in China. And as we've seen, well, people might say and have said, well, that's Asian women, but how does that apply to Western women? But other studies show that this is just a human thing. It's not about the country that people are in. And historically, women in China had very low rates of breast cancer. Now they have, with the further industrialization and adoption of certain Western customs and Western ways, the rate of breast cancer has been increasing in China. So it isn't as it was back 30, 40 years ago, but it's certainly the case in all the good studies that mm, uh, soy does not promote the growth of breast cancer, or, from my knowledge, prostate, because some of them also talk about prostate. It's the same pattern, and increased when they talk about a dose response curve, Ben, the increased consumption of soy is generally associated with an increased benefit. But since these are phytoestrogens, if you were to greatly increase the amount that normally would appear in your food intake, then the bets are sort of off because we don't know at what point that these phytoestrogens could become uh, carcinogenic or could become, estrogenic, in the sense that even if they're very weak in and of themselves, they still could theoretically promote the growth of cancer at a very high rate. And we don't really know what that high rate is. And as I said, this whole scare about soy started with a couple of experiments back in the day of giving animals very concentrated supplement form of soy, of the isoflavones. So I wouldn't take isoflavone supplements, isolated supplements. I
Mhm.
would increase, if I wanted to get the soy, and I think it's a good idea, I would increase my intake of soy in various forms.
So I am reluctant to admit that I really know almost nothing about soy as a food product. I've been known to buy some tofu and then have it just kind of go bad in the fridge while I've not eaten it.
Well, I will admit that I have somewhat the same problem that you do. I approve of it and I buy it, and then sometimes it'll sit there in the fridge. But I know how to prepare it, but it isn't my go-to food. Let's put it that way. But I do like the flavored ones, the ones that are marinated, if I can, like in sriracha sauce, and they make a quick meal. And you can throw together some pea pods or whatever vegetables you want, and saute it a little bit in some not too strong olive oil, and it makes a very nice dish. So, as I say, I will shamelessly admit that I I don't always do what I'm advocating for, but in this case, I have no objection to it. My problem is that my wife, your mother, is completely convinced that she can't digest soy. See, and so she doesn't. So and since I cook for both of us, that is a bit of a problem. Is this a psychological thing or a physical thing? There's a physical basis for it, and that is that there are enzyme inhibitors in soy, as in all beans. And it's my belief that part of the reason beans in general are difficult to digest is because of these enzyme inhibitors. So there's been a sort of an anti soy bias, and possibly some people are more prone to finding soy difficult to digest. There's no harm in substituting tofu for red meat. It's a very low amount of carbohydrates in tofu, much less than in many other plant foods, for instance. They're very available, and I put them into a lot of recipes where otherwise you might want to have black beans or even red. I made a chili the other day using black soybeans.
Really?
Yeah, and it's good. You should try
And
it.
you buy them dry and hydrate
Well,
them?
I've done that. I once bought like a 50-pound sack of them. That lasted like 10 years. But you can buy them in just regular cans, like you get cans in the supermarket. And they're
I don't remember seeing them. I'll have to keep an eye
E-
out.
Eden, Eden is the
Yeah.
brand that I've used, and that's a good, reputable, very reputable company. And yeah, so you can substitute soybeans, and you won't be any the worse in terms of taste, or and you certainly be a bit ahead of the game in terms of healthiness.
Hmm. Great. Anything else to add?
No, I think that this should put people's minds at ease. Women, especially with breast cancer, especially estrogen receptor positive, but also there are studies showing in estrogen receptor negative patients that it also has benefit, and that would correspond to the portion of the degree to which the soy is fighting by mechanisms other than its connection to very low levels of the phytoestrogens, because there's obviously other things going on, other chemicals within the soy. So either case, even if you're ER negative, estrogen receptive receptor negative, it still would be beneficial to do. But this is especially relevant to women who are afraid of getting breast cancer, or who have had breast cancer and are afraid of a recurrence and think that maybe this would be an increased source of recurrence. It's exactly the opposite.
Okay. Well, I think that most of our audience already knows, although it's good to repeat, that whenever you're buying a food product to take for health purposes, it makes sense to try to find the highest quality,
Yeah,
most organically grown products that you can. And
yeah.
I'm assuming that the same goes for soy, as far as getting soy milk or tofu or buying the beans, the whole beans. There be variations in the quality and the sort of, the organic factor with them. Do you know anything in particular about that? I know that farming is not your specialty, but some crops I think are much more prone to being treated with pesticides and fertilizers and so forth. And I really don't know much at all about the crop. Do you?
Um, no, I don't. But the beans that I was recommending, Eden, it says right on the label, organic black soybeans.
Okay.
But I imagine that they are sprayed if you don't specify organic. So I would
Yeah.
always go in this case in particular. I would definitely go organic. Yeah.
Great. Okay, well, I think that's great news for everyone to know that they can eat soy and not have it be any problem for them as far as promoting breast cancer. In fact, quite the reverse based on the studies that you just cited. And I think for me, it's the start of another sort of food adventure of getting to be more familiar with a healthy ingredient. And I'm looking forward to that. So thanks for bringing that to our attention. So for now, for the Moss Report, I'm Ben Moss. How are you healing today? Thank you for watching. We really appreciate all of the support. Please leave a like, a comment, subscribe to the channel, and visit themossreport.com. We wish you all the best for health and healing.